Hello, everyone, and welcome to Thorough Newspaper Analysis, which is presented to you by LawSeco. So, we'll be discussing three articles today. The first one is from the Hindu, and it is titled as India Needs a Rainbow Recovery Plan. So, here basically, after the COVID-19 scenario, what kind of recovery do we need, and what are the different elements that we need to inculcate in the recovery plan have been discussed. So, this is actually a very good plan. Let's have a look at it. And in the second article, which is titled as India, Quad and Value of Coalitions. So this is from the Indian Express. And as we know that the meeting for Quad is just going to happen. And that is why the relevance of India in the quadrilateral and also what are the actual value or importance of coalitions at the international level will be discussed in this article. And in the third one, which is again from the Indian Express, the title is Why It's an Underestimate to Say Only 6% farmers benefit from MSP. So as we know that after the farm bills, the question of MSP, the minimum support price, has been very highly is being asked, and it's a discussion about that as to how many or what percentage of farmers are being benefited from MSP currently. And fourthly, we have the news and flash column wherein we'll be discussing the small and crisp news points that are specifically more important for our prelims exam. Let's have a look at the LawSeco courses before that. So we would like to endorse to you the lot of the courses or the judiciary test prep course that we have for you. So if you're also a judicial services aspirant, you can definitely enroll yourself for this course. The link is already available in the description box. You can have a look for sure. And also from the landing page, you can download free study material, which is very efficiently drafted for all the aspirants. Now let's see that what is the multiple choice question for you today. Who has recently won the Nobel Prize 2020 for medicine? Option 1 or A. Harvey Alter, B. Charles Rice, or C. Michael Houghton, or as you call it's Michael Houghton. So, or the D option is all of the above. So, if you know the answer to this question, do jot it down in the comment section below. So this is the descriptive question for the day. Discuss the importance of alliances and treaties in the international coordination. So once we have discussed today's article, you'll definitely be able to answer this very easily. And the answer must be written within a word limit of 250 to maximum 300 words. With this, let's start the first article for the day, which talks about a Rainbow New Deal or R&D for India. First of all, we need to understand that this idea of having a Rainbow New Deal is just a suggestion for now. So please remember that this is no any initiative taken from the side of government, or there is no concrete government or complete statutory scheme coming out of it right now. It is just a suggestion as to what should be an ideal recovery scheme after the COVID-19 pandemic. So please view today's this article in the similar light. So political mainstreams in Europe and the United States has proposed a Green New Deal. So it's almost like on the same lines of the Green New Deal. It actually enhances or it tries to put together the climate and employment crisis at the center of economic development. Now, on the very similar lines, we have in India that we can build for India the Rainbow New Deal. So almost it is on the similar lines, just the name that has been allotted, and also obviously some changes have should be made if we at all implement this deal, keeping in mind the particular demands of the Indian demography. So basically the Green New Deal, or now if we refer to in the Indian context to the Rainbow New Deal, it tries to collaborate, or it tries to bring together the ecology as well as the economy. Now, as we know that when we consider this relationship, we have three main P's in our consideration, the letter P. So one is for planet, one is for profit, and the second is for profit, and the third one is for people. So there has to be a balance that we need to create amongst these three entities, which are very, very important: planet, people, and we have the growth, or what we call as the production. So in this regard, let's understand that what is the Rainbow New Deal. Firstly, it is a seamless integration of ecological protection, tackling of wealth inequality, and economic vulnerability. So all the three major components, or to say major things that would be tackled through the Rainbow New Deal would be firstly the ecological protection, which we are so much fighting for these days, then tackling for wealth inequality, that is the social disparity, the social differences amongst the people should be reduced, and thirdly, economic vulnerability of the people, that is removal of poverty and hunger. Then it would entail generation of dignified and sustainable livelihood that we're all looking forward to, and also we have vowed to the sustainable development goals that actually take us towards the sustainable livelihood in the long run. Then regenerating and safeguarding country's soil and natural ecosystem, water, biological diversity and air. Then, under this, the farmers, pastoralists, basically pastoralists are those people or those groups of people who actually depend on the pastures or the pasture lands for their the survival of their herd or their animals. So those specifically are known as the pastoralists. And fishers can be enabled to sustain or switch to organic or ecologically sustainable production. So as we know that currently we are trying to switch towards the organic farming and mixed farming and various of those activities or agricultural activities that actually lead to a greener and more sustainable means of growth. But as we know that as compared to the chemical fertilizers, for example, the organic fertilizers are, firstly, they're expensive, secondly, they are not so easily available, and thirdly, they do not yield those results as we see from the chemical fertilizers coming. So this is just a mere example. So it says that the government or we all together should invest in such a manner that ecologically sustainable production can be ensured. Now, the next point is to encourage lifestyle and livelihood that obtain their needs from natural ecosystem. Then reviving and sustaining India's incredible diversity of crafts. Now here, this point is something that makes Rainbow New Deal very unique in its own sense, because when we try to compare it with the Green New Deal, so there is no such major discussion about the local crafts or the handicrafts that are available. But since in India we know that India has been the land of art and art and culture, and we have a number of handicrafts that run from one end of the country to the other, and that is why the Rainbow New Deal shall also include reviving and sustaining India's incredible diversity of crafts, and then finally decentralized production of goods and services to take place, substantial investments in public health, education, housing, transportation, and other needs, empowering and benefiting the most marginalized people, and shift from made in India to handmade in India by local workers. So this is such a good initiative that if we take it into consideration, made in India is something that we would encourage, obviously, but it is more with the help of machines, or more with capital investment. So capital investment, as we know, it is not labor intensive, as in not much of employment can be sought through the capital investment or through machines and every other through technology, etc. But when we talk about handmade in India, it comes very handy, and it comes to the rescue of those local workers who are firstly in the need of an employment, and definitely they are very much skilled in producing some kind of artifacts or handicrafts. And that is why it would really not only enhance India as a land of crafts, but also it would provide more and more employment and better livelihood to the people of a country as well. Then create villages self-reliant on basic needs. And then examples of these handicraft schemes and this all schemes is the Kudumbashri in Kerala and Jharcraft in Jharkhand. So these are two initiatives that are running in the states of Kerala and Jharkhand respectively, and they have seen a significant success from some period of time, and they've really come up as good initiatives for as a recovery plan after, especially after the COVID-19, and these have been running even before COVID-19. So this is really a good step in this direction. So let's understand that what is the condition precedent for the success of the Rainbow New Deal. Now, obviously, Rainbow New Deal or any deal is not something that can be that can be implemented just like that. We obviously need to prepare our mindsets and people also to for the better implementation of the Rainbow New Deal. So it says that firstly we need to have a fundamental shift from privatized and capitalist and authoritarian state. Just as I discussed that we are currently switching hugely towards the capitalist society or the capitalist market system. wherein we are investing more on machines and technology, but they actually, on the contrary, definitely they give better produce and a greater produce, but it is not at all labor intensive. That is it cannot provide a lot of employment to the people, and that is why we should shift from this kind of regime. Then secondly, tackling of casteism, patriarchy, and other inequalities existing in the society. And thirdly, land reforms, that is reorganizing the collective rights of the people over land. So here, Prime Minister Modi's Atmanirbhar Bharat places India's economy even more into the hands of private and big players, which is definitely a question to think about. And if at all this is going to continue, that any deal or any plan like that of a Rainbow New Deal will not be able to implement itself efficiently in the country. Now, next article talks about the India and coalitions. So, the foreign ministers of Quad, who come from the United States, India, Japan, and Australia. So, basically, these are the four countries that form the quadrilateral, which in short is known as the Quad. And this actually has various goals for maintaining security and peace in the Indo-Pacific region, so on and so forth. So there are various aims. We've already discussed about Quad at several occasions. So they are meeting in Japan today. So it creates confusion as to India's tradition of non-alignment. Now, as we know that after the Second World War, when various countries were choosing to become, either the allies or the friends of United States, or the allies of the Russia, the erstwhile USSR. But there were also some third world countries. India was one of those third world countries that actually chose not to choose any of the sides, and we took up the policy of being non-aligned to any of those. So that is why we came in with the idea. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, he came in with the idea of NAM, that was known as the non-aligned movement. So wherein it said that we will be exercising our own sovereignty, and we as a nation would not favor as such any of the powers of the superpowers, the then superpowers of the world. And but currently, now when India is getting into a lot of international alliances and collaborations and coordinations. So many times the question of India being still non-alignment has been raised, that are we really non-aligned in today's sense also, or are we really inclining ourselves towards some particular country? Like for example, many a times when India tries to favor USA in any of the policies, so China always has this thing to claim that India is not following the policy of its non-alignment, and it is showing an inclination towards the United States. But then again, this idea is really a debatable one. But what India has to say in this regard is that favoring a particular nation for no reason is a different thing, but then obviously getting into collaborations and coordinations with nations for your own interest, for your security, for your growth, economic welfare, and so on and so forth, is something that any good nation would do. And that is why it should not be viewed as India being aligning towards any particular country. Rather, it should be viewed that India is not a closed economy. So it is something which is heavily indulged into imports and exports, and definitely India is one of the emerging powers of the world, and its say, or its viewpoint is very crucial in the global order. And that is why it is important that India should not shut down its doors towards the nations, and it should get into coordinations with different nations for different purposes. So here, what are the main questions revolving around the confusion? They're more or less the same thing, that the negative connotation in India's foreign policy discourse, as I just discussed. So, but they are a part of the statecraft, as we just said, that it is really important for any country, like just as we take example of Atmanirbhar Bharat also. So India wants to become self-reliant, but it should not be confused with the idea of India not wanting to trade with any country. These two things are totally different. One thing is that we are becoming we want to become self-sufficient, so that we are, in the times of crisis, we do not have to look up to the other nations for any particular essential needs or essential items. But closing down the economy or being a closed economy simply means that we have absolutely no coordination and collaboration in terms of trade or any other import or export with the countries, and we are not ourselves also sufficient to fulfill our own needs. So these are two very different things and should not be confused at all. So it says that it is a part of a statecraft as it enhances one's power, just like in the case of Quad. deterring or defeating one's adversaries. Like, for example, recently, if we know that India and China are not really enjoying a very good bilateral relationship. But in this scenario, Quad or the quadrilateral is coming up as a deterring agent to China's power, because China has been significantly growing its power not only in the Indian Ocean region, but also in the Indo-Pacific region and also in the South China Sea, all the areas that are really crucial for Indian security and trade as well. In such a scenario, if India, along with some of its friends, has influence in that particular area, obviously we're talking about the positive influence. So in such a scenario, it would be possible for us to deter the unwarranted growth or unwarranted advancement of Chinese power in this area, and we would be able to secure our own interests very easily. And that is why it helps in defeating or deterring one's adversaries. And then it involves written treaty, but in multiple forms and shapes, and multilateral, bilateral, and formal or informal. And treaties are something that actually make the international law happen. So treaties are a very important part, and if we do not have treaties at all, how are we supposed to coordinate and collaborate with other nations? So, what is India's historical stand on forming coalitions? So, the entire system of forming coalitions has also been mentioned in our epics, like that of Mahabharata, Panchtantra, and Arthashastra, and it has been considered to be as one of the best policies of statecraft and to grow a strong nation. Like, as we know that in the periods of our ancient history as well, Gupta period was known to be as the golden age of Indian history, because at this time India was flourishing in almost all the fields, be it in trade, be it in amount of economy, be it in amount of art and culture, music, literature, architecture. So any field you count, India was excelling in each and every field. This was actually possible because Gupta kings, they were very, clear about forming very good relationships with the outer world. And Gupta period was one such period wherein India had enjoyed one of the best relationships that it ever had with the Middle East nations, because there was a huge trade that used to happen of gold and silk. India used to sell or export huge amounts of silk and silk products, and we used to get in return a lot of gold coming from the Middle East region. So that time also, even the ancient rulers had recognized the need and the importance of collaborating at the international level. Now, here are some examples that have been given. Like, of the Indian nationalist movement, some nationalists joined hands with Imperial Germany to set up first Indian government in exile in Kabul. Then, during the World War II, Subhash Chandra Bose joined forces with Imperial Japan. This is a very famous incident, to set up the provisional government in Port Blair, Andaman Islands. So here are some examples. Just like in 1972, also India signed a treaty of friendship with Bangladesh. So these examples have been given, and India has always been a very good and friendly nation, and that is why it should definitely not put down its international outreach just in the name of, or being restricted by the non-aligned movement. Now here, the next thing it says that is the US offering India an alliance against China? So the current political discourse in Washington is hostile to alliance making. Trump opposes alliances, whereas Biden talks of strengthening alliances. So these are something really, political questions. We should not really interfere or indulge ourselves into this kind of debates. But let's, whatever comes for the interest of India, our own country, we should definitely take up that task. So what is the instrumental nature of alliances? So basically, we need to know that what is the basic understanding of the international alliances that we are talking about. Agreements for security cooperation are made for a specific content and against a particular threat. Like, just for example, if you talk about the FATF, which is the Financial Action Task Force, which is very much into news because they're going to consider to whether just let Pakistan stay in its grey list or upgrade it to the blacklist, or what to do. So basically, FATF is it's an international organization that actually, it's an international collaboration that works to cater to two most important ideas, or in a way most important causes. Firstly, to stop the state sponsored terrorism, and secondly, to curb down money laundering cases. So just like that, we know that these international cooperations are made for specific content and against a particular threat. Once the circumstances change, they are not worth the written agreement, and maybe with coming time they do change. Just like they have given an example of 1950 security treaty between India and Nepal to protect Nepal against Chinese threat. But later on, when the objective of this treaty was met, it was actually, just it did not exist anymore in the practical sense. So this was all for this article. Let's discuss the next article for the day, the third one, which talks about MSP benefits to farmer. So in the debates revolving around the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Promotion and Facilitation Act, which we have been so extensively we've been discussing, that the three acts which have the farm bills or farm acts now, so that actually are being protested in a lot of states by a lot of farmers. So it is often quoted, according to this act, that only 6% of Indian farmers benefit from MSP. Basically, let me just give you a short, very crisp background to this. The major demand that the farmers have from government in lieu of these three acts is that the minimum support price that used to come from the government, so the minimum support price should be given statutory backing and statutory protection under these three acts, so to make sure that if the farmer would even want to sell his produce outside the mandi or the APMC, which we talk about, so he should be able to avail the benefits of the minimum support price. But definitely, since we know that minimum support price is an administrative action and it has nowhere been in a statutory manner been protected, so the government on its own side says that only 6% of Indian farmers benefit from MSP. Now, this is the contention that has been debated in this article, because the author says that it is not just this small number of 6% Indian farmers being benefited from MSP. Rather, it is a greater number of the farmers that are benefited from MSP, and that is the very reason why they're asking for securing the minimum support price from the government. The figure was originally quoted by the High Level Committee on Restructuring of Food Corporation of India. So the report submitted in 2015 stated that only 5.21 million out of 90.2 million agricultural households in 2012-13 sold paddy and wheat to a government procurement agency, and this was less than 5.8%. So in a way, only this percentage of the farmers availed the benefits of the minimum support prices coming from the government. But then, why the data is in underestimation? So why can we really consider that MSP given only availed only by 6% of farmers is data that is underestimated? So the committee only considered paddy. So this is something really we need to understand, that it only considered paddy and wheat. So only two of the major crops were considered, but other crops also should be considered. Like 29.51% of cotton is also procured through MSP. 18.47% of chana, gram, and 18.8% of arar or tur dal as well. So these are also very important crops that are grown in India, and considering all the facts just based on the procurement of paddy and wheat would not be a justified situation. And in 2019-20, 11.06 million paddy farmers and 4.06 million wheat farmers benefited from MSP. So this data that has been quoted by the Act is coming from 2012 to 13, but according to the 2019 data, this number has significantly increased, and it is actually total is 13 to 13.5 million after eliminating double counting. So just by only once, if we also consider the farmers, it would be approximately 13.5 million of the farmers who are being benefited, way more than just 5.21 million as compared to the 2012-13 scenario. So this should not be misguided by the government in any sense, that MSP is not that important for the farmers, because many a times cases have been seen that to avail better prices through MSP, many farmers actually have moved from Uttar Pradesh to Haryana to get a better minimum selling price for their agricultural products. So let's see, what do we have for news in flash today? Virus researchers get Nobel Prize for Medicine. So American scientist Harvey Alter and Charles Rice and Michael Houghton of UK have been recognized for their contributions to the discovery of hepatitis C virus, which is a very deadly fatal virus, in 1970s and 80s. So the cure has been found and effective antiviral drugs are now available. So the importance of the discovery was that with this, the blood given to all kinds of patients has become a lot safer. Now all three causes of blood-borne infections, hepatitis B, C and HIV, have been discovered. So this is a really good advancement in the medical science that was done by the three of them. So the MCQ also, you probably now know the answer. So this is a very important question to be remembered. So with this, we are done with today. Thank you so much for joining with Law Sikhu. We hope it was a good session for you all. Thank you.